Hey guys, this is Eric Weingartner with Weingartner Racing. Today's Wednesday, so it's a product review video, and it's a review of one of the intakes I literally just finished porting. This is an Edelbrock Super Victor fuel injected manifold for an 8.2 deck Ford. So for those guys that think I don't do Fords, I do Fords. This is for a customer, ZSR. He's a great engine builder for Fords. Do a lot of work with him, and he does a lot of cool stuff. Anyway, we'll talk a little bit about this manifold, and then I'll answer one of the questions. But before I do that, in my last video, I said that I really would like for you guys to ask tech questions in the comments on this video or the last video or any video really, because, and it doesn't have to be about this Ford intake, it can be about really about anything. Engine related or race related. And if I can't answer them, I will answer them, and I'll do that on Friday, because on Friday, I typically do a video and it's about racing stuff. Well, there's not a lot of racing stuff going on because it's like 100 degrees and the truck's not done, and I'm not racing the Camaro in this heat. So I'll talk about a few things and some updates in the shop, but largely I would like to answer some of your questions in the video. Am I going to do a live feed? No, I don't have time for that. So my live feed would be like, here it is, 11:20 at night. Most of you are in bed, and here I'm talking about stuff because I'm still working. So I don't do that. So, but please, if there's something you want to know, leave it in the comments. Just ask the question. However, if you ask a stupid question, you may get a stupid answer. Not trying to be mean or nothing. So, but please ask your question. And I don't have all the answers, and if I don't, I'll straight up tell you. And maybe the other reason for asking the questions early is because it gives me time to prepare to maybe show things that might answer the questions. Anyway, let's get to this. This manifold's been ported. Okay. As you can tell what I've done. The manifold itself is really close out of the box. These Super Victors, at least from this standpoint, it's pretty nice. They're pretty good the way they are. Now this is going on a smaller cubic inch. Obviously it's an 8.2 deck, so it's not a whole lot that has to be done as far as making the runner area bigger than what you would typically see. But there is some work done to it, mostly radius in the top, so it gets it bigger there. Move things over to make a little bit more area entry. And that's pretty much it. So most of the work is pretty much confined with this area. But as far as other intake manifolds compared to this one, this is far less work than, say, like a CHI or a BMP intake manifold, because usually there's far more grinding involved with them compared to these. Now, I do want to address something because someone did ask a question. I figure I'll answer it right now. The question that got asked was, let me turn off the air conditioner again. Figure I'd remember to do that before filming. Anyway, one of the questions that got asked was, how do you address the shorter runners versus the long runners on like a Ford intake manifold? And I'll talk about that. So just to give you an idea, all manifolds, whether it be Ford, LS is like this as well, have some runners where the lengths are different in length. And the exception to this would be like a tunnel ram. Tunnel rams all have the same length, and I'll get to that. But Ford seem to be, and LSs really seem to be more of a significant difference in length of the runners. So if you look, you have an outside runner that's really long, and then you've got a pretty short inside runners, and a long one, of course, on this outside as well. So the question that you might be asking was, how does that affect anything, or what do you do in the ports? Well, this is where it gets kind of tricky. You could make them all the same length if you could do different things with the manifold. Obviously, if you raise the height of the manifold up, this would start extending this out, and you could straighten this one if you made the plenum bigger. So in other words, if I stretched this plenum, in other words, you end up coming more towards like a tunnel ram, and made it taller, these runners would get more equal in length. You could also, of course, weld onto this, but you're extending this one out as well. But you could weld onto here, bring this out, and you could try to make it better. There's no, I mean, you could also weld in here too to extend it out. But then as you bring these further out, you're also bringing them closer together. So it may not be practical. If you look at a small block Chevy, they end up really close together. So it may not be something that's feasible. Now, you might be like, well, does that mean it sucks? Well, no, because I want to talk about something. In any engine, as far as horsepower-wise goes, there's a length of the runner where it's going to make its best power. It's by the RPM. So for instance, and this is being very general, generally a longer runner will make power at a lower RPM versus a short runner. And so if you look at this one, you've got a long runner here and the short runners here. So this would favor lower RPM horsepower, and this would favor higher RPM horsepower. You're like, wouldn't it be better if they were all the same? Yes and no, and I'll do my best to explain. With the shorter runners the shorter runners, you get a couple advantages. It of course builds high RPM power, but it's not like, I want to back up. Sorry, I had to rearrange my thoughts in my head because they were going faster than my mouth could work. The shorter runner, or the longer runner, even though it's tailored more towards low RPM, it's not like it automatically falls off at after it hits its peak. So there is a slight advantage to having different length runners, because if you think about it, when this one starts tapering off, the shorter runner starts carrying on. Hopefully you understand this. So let's say this, and I'm being this just throwing numbers. Let's say this peaks because of this runner. This cylinder here, because of the runner length, its wave tuning would be wave tuned to say 6,500 RPM. And this one being shorter would be wave tuned to say 7,000 RPM. So you would think this one's going to drop off like a rock, but it doesn't quite do that. Usually they hang on and then fall off. So what you can have happen is it actually extends the power band, having two different length of runners in a way. So in other words, as this one's trailing off, this one starts picking up. So if you look at your horsepower graph, and I've done a little drawing over here, I'll kind of show you, it carries it longer. Your peak power goes out longer. But here's the thing. If you were to have them all the same length, typically what you'd find is, let's say I targeted one like the engine's gonna make power at 7,000 RPM, and I made all the runners where the tuning length would be stable at 7,000 RPM. You would make more peak power for sure than you would have something like this. However, the power before it would probably not be as good as this, because this one gets advantage of having one long runner. That's assuming that they're all straight. Tunnel rams have another advantage, being that the runners are straight. In other words, what I'm trying to say is, having two different length runners isn't necessarily a horrible thing. And here's how I kind of find out. When I was doing testing for Engine Masters, and I only bring this up because of Engine Masters, we did so much testing and found out so much stupid stuff. And I listened to so many different people that we got to see different things that I wouldn't have thought of before. And so I drew this kind of graphs out to kind of give you an idea. So typically this would be a horsepower graph. Let's say you pull up a dyno sheet and you were to see one. Typically with a single plane, if this was 2,500 RPM, at least what we were doing, you'd see the torque come up and then it would make this dip and then it would start climbing and the power would kind of hang on. However, in all fairness, our Engine Master engine usually dropped off pretty heavily because we favored this side of the RPM better than this one. Anyway, but typical, most curves are this way. Well, for 1 year, they switched us to a tunnel ram where we could run one, so obviously everybody did, because it did make more power. But what I started seeing, and I wasn't the only one that saw this, is that where this dip occurred would go deeper with a tunnel ram. Because if you, from this one on the single plane, because they're different lengths, they're almost overlapping at certain points, as unlike the tunnel ram where they're all the same length. So once they're out of tune, they're all out of tune. When this is out of tune, you might only have them halfway in tune for this one, half out of tune for this one. So it's more of a blend. So typically what you saw was the dip wouldn't be as bad on a single plane as it would be for a tunnel ram. Now the tunnel ram itself, though, would always make more peak power. It also made more torque. And I want to, which I didn't draw a torque graph on here, but the tunnel ram always made more torque. It always made more horsepower, but it always had a worse dip. And that's just in the curve. And this might happen between, at least where I was testing, usually happen between like 35 and 3,800 RPM. So 500 RPM swing, you would see the torque come up and then go down and then start really hitting it, because now it's coming right into the tuning wave, the length for that runner, and it's being tuned for that, and it starts really carrying. The single plane, that if you looked at its torque, it wouldn't fall off, and then it would just kind of carry it, almost stay flat, almost like you'd say like almost like electric motor. The reason for that being the different length of runners. One's half out of tune, one's in tune. It just kind of helps things. Now, hopefully that answers the question of how do you address this. If I have my choice, I try to pick an average length that works best. In other words, I look at, well, a single plane, you know, there's only so much you're able to do without bringing out a welder, period. So you could cut them down and you make them shorter, but without bringing on a welder, you're not going to make them a different length. And most customers, I'll be straight up honest, you don't want to do that because they don't want to spend the money, which that's fine. So what I try to do if I was doing something for custom anyway, I look at the average length that would get me the most power. So I take these and average them where I want the power to be and try to make them as close to that as I can, knowing some are going to be longer and some are going to be shorter, and try to make an average of where it needs to be. That's how I do it. Anyway, hopefully that makes somewhat of sense. Sometimes I think I talk too fast and don't talk and say the right things because literally my brain's working faster than my mouth. But anyway, hopefully that kind of solves some of that mystery with it and gives you something else to think about. But I don't want you to get the idea that the single plane is going to make more power than the tunnel ram. Tunnel ram always makes more torque as well, even low down. So people like tunnel rams don't make torque down low. They do. They do. It just has at least from my testing, it definitely has a bigger dip. But when it comes out of it, it's still making more. So maybe if you looked at the numbers, if I was to overlay them, the single plane just in this section right here would be better than that. After that, before and after, and even that total averages, always a tunnel ram. So anyway, just something to think about. Hope you guys like this. Give you some more looks at the inside of the manifold. Really nice piece. By the way, good luck getting one of these. They're back ordered to never because Edelbrock's really behind on everything. It's too bad. I don't know how many thousands of dollars are losing and not having product available, but it's got to be in the millions by now. Anyway, thanks for sticking around for this long. Sorry if it went long. Just wanted to get this out real quick. You guys take care. Oh, make sure you ask questions.